With more, Andy McCarthy is former federal prosecutor and National Review contributing editor. Karl Rove, Fox News political contributor and former President George W. Bush deputy chief of staff. And Marie Harf, former State Department spokesperson and a Fox News contributor. Welcome all. And Andy, I want to start with you, if I may. Good to have you here tonight, sir. What do you make of these latest subpoenas?
Well, you don't issue a subpoena unless you have a good faith basis to believe the documents that you're asking for exist. So we've heard in other reporting that Nunes has been exposed to some intelligence and says he has uncovered some masking. The suggestion is that at least these three officials, Rice, Brennan, and Powell, are involved in the unmasking. Rice we've already heard about. Brennan, it wouldn't be unusual for him to be involved if there were unmasking decisions, because what we call the intelligence community is about 17 agencies. There's really only 3 of them who do the actual collection of intelligence, the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI. And they generally make the first cut. They're the ones who make the decisions about unmasking. So that's something the CIA would be involved in. The peculiar thing, obviously, is Samantha Power. Her job is really diplomatic. She's not an intelligence analyst in that function. So there could be a good explanation for it. And again, we need to underscore that, until we see an unmasking document or it gets confirmed, we don't know it exists. Yeah. But it is odd to have the UN ambassador implicated.
And we saw that questioning by Trey Gowdy, who's now in charge of that investigation, one of 3 people in charge of that investigation, going after that issue. Did an ambassador ever ask to have specific people in the Trump administration with regard to this unmasked as the crunch was on at the very end of the Obama administration? And we know that they had made an effort to sort of push some of this information out there that they were concerned about. They thought, for the good of the country, but others think that there was something nefarious.
Yeah, and you notice that when Brennan was asked that question, he sort of hesitated answering it. He didn't say, well, she's an ambassador. What else would you expect her to be doing? Yeah. It would be unusual.
All right. In terms of Carter Page, right, what do you make of the fact that he was out there this morning saying, I want to tell my story, and they asked me to come tell my story. Now apparently I'm permanently off the list.
I've got 2 theories about it. Number one, to take it at face value, what Schiff is saying and what the Democrats are saying, nobody has been interviewed yet, purportedly. So it's not just Page, they haven't interviewed witnesses yet. And what Schiff, who is a longtime former prosecutor, says is we're responsibly gathering the documents before we start to question witnesses. Now, I will tell you, as a longtime former prosecutor myself, I don't remember telling a witness I didn't want to hear from him if he wanted to speak to me. But they could be doing their homework before they do all of the interviews, and they don't want to.
Well, the language that we heard was that he had been postponed indefinitely, which we're being told in this circle means it's not going to happen. They're not interested. And Marie, let me bring you in. The suggestion is that they might not like the narrative that he's going to present.
Well, I spoke to some of my Democratic friends on the Hill who are working on the investigation, and they said that they very much want to hear from him, but it's exactly what you just said, that they're doing the investigating, they're getting their witness list together, and something can't be postponed if it hasn't actually been scheduled. They will get to Carter Page. They want to hear from him. They want, I think, to hear from a lot of people. But the notion that they somehow don't want to question him just isn't true. And that, as Congressman Schiff said, they're doing this in a very orderly process. They will get to him, I think, among other people, Mike Flynn and others as well.
I mean, he's saying he was notified by the committee staff on Memorial Day that he might not immediately be afforded the opportunity to address them as per their previously scheduled appointment for this week. So it has clearly been postponed. Karl, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think Andy, as the former prosecutor, has probably got it exactly right. This is building. The other potential is that, look, Carter Page has always struck me as being a fringe element of this whole story. Right. Here's a guy who, even the Russians in the communications that have been made public, are dismissive of him as a guy who is eager to make money. And so he is using a tenuous connection with the Trump campaign to try and leverage himself into a big deal with the Russians and trying to leverage his supposed connections with the Russians to leverage himself into a big
And
deal. in the
nonetheless,
campaign.
he was the person who was named as, intimately involved, definitely connected to the Russians in the early part of this story. It was Roger Stone and Carter Page. Those were the names that were constantly thrown out there. But in terms of immunity and the possibility that any of these people might get immunity, Andy, just a quick thought on that. And how would that hamper what Robert Mueller has to do?
They're not going to get immunity unless the Justice Department, in this case Mueller, helps, and he won't. The other thing that occurs to me, though, is they're expecting Comey to come in and testify in the Senate next week. I suspect that if the Democrats are doing this strategically, if there's any politics involved in this, which I wouldn't be cynical enough to suggest, maybe they don't want to step on Comey's testimony. Maybe they want that to sing by itself because they think it's going to be good
So
for
we
them.
know that Comey has been sort of putting things out into the atmosphere. And today it was through a source, Carl, that he is going to go in there and say that he felt he was being nudged, persuaded, whatever word you want to use, to drop the Flynn investigation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny how he suddenly discovered that after several months of silence. If he really felt that he was being improperly pressured to drop this, that this was obstruction of justice, then he had a moral obligation at that moment to tell the president that and then tender his resignation to the Attorney General of the United States. But, I have a very low opinion. He is the most sanctimonious, condescending individual I think I've ever met in Washington. He's the only honest man in the room, and he was honest to himself in January when he met with the president and didn't see anything wrong with it, and he's the most honest man in the room today when he sees something retrospectively to be very much out of order.
We may get a replay of what we saw in July. We may get the flip side of that. He could go in there and say the equivalent of extremely careless, right? Hillary Clinton was with her email server.
Right.
And he may say, President Trump, should never have said these things to me this way. I'm not going to add anything to, sort of characterize what he said, but here's what he said. I'm not saying that, I thought it was improper, but this really, just lay it out there. He could do that.
But it's not improper. I mean, look, the president has the authority to tell the FBI director is not an independent actor. The president runs the executive branch. The president has the authority to tell the FBI director. If he ordered him flat out to drop an investigation, that would not be obstruction of justice. It would be executive discretion. The key word in obstruction of justice is corruptly. So if Trump, for corrupt reasons, were to ask for an investigation to be dropped, that would be one thing. If he thought the equities were on the side of not prosecuting, like, for example, if he had fired the guy the day before and said, look, with everything this guy's been through, enough is enough. We don't have to lop on an indictment with it. You may not like that decision, but that's not corruption. That's discretion.
But you can sort of poison the atmosphere just by saying, here's what he did. He was nudging me. I didn't really like it. I didn't feel comfortable. But I don't think it's obstruction of justice, which would be what he did.
Create a political problem for the guy who fired him. This is Jim Comey. This is Jim Comey exacting revenge, maybe unconsciously, for having been dismissed as FBI director. And but again, Andy's absolutely right. The president is in charge of the government. He is in charge of the FBI. If the FBI director believes that it is improper, he can resign. If it is improper, it has to involve corruption, and there was none.
We got to leave it there. Thank you so much.